Today I want to talk to you about Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is a thought experiment created by um, philosophers, and it's about a ship, and the ship is called Theseus. You may have heard about this if you watch TV and you watch WandaVision. There were two robots, Vision, and one is the original vision and the other one is the second vision. So the question is, which one is the vision and which one is lowercase t vision? So which is the ship of Theseus and which is the ship of Theseus? So the ship of Theseus is about a ship, and it's sailing around and it's doing ship stuff, and it starts getting old. And as it's getting old, it's having to replace some of the planks. So as it replaces the first plank, it just throws the plank overboard. And another ship comes along and finds the plank and picks it up. And then the ship of Theseus throws another plank over and replaces that one, and another plank and another plank, and so on and so forth, until the entire ship is made out of new planks. The ship following the original ship of Theseus has picked up all the planks and built a new ship out of the old ship parts. So the question is, which is the ship of Theseus? Was it the original ship, even though it was made completely out of new planks? Or is it the ship that's built out of the old planks? Is that the ship of Theseus? So I've applied this question to the founding documents. Which is the original and which is the copy? And the answer is there's really not a copy. There's a first and then there's a second. So there's an independent government and then there's a dependent government. So the Articles of Confederation created or acknowledged the independent sovereign government. The Constitution is dependent and non-sovereign. Now these two documents are legal documents. Okay, they're both considered legal. So I look into Black's Law Dictionary and you find independent state as a sovereign state. A dependent state as a non-sovereign state. Now the Constitution also created posts, which are lands or places, is the word it uses. Places purchased for defense. And defense is spelled with a C, which means forts in the Law of Nations. And the Law of Nations uses defense with a C. It's an old French word, not a new French word, an old French word. And old French comes from Norse, and it means to fortify. Defense with an S comes from Old Latin, and it means vengeance. So the Constitution uses the word defense with a C. Now, somehow, some way, someone is still arguing this point. I've looked in all the old dictionaries and encyclopedias that I can find of the time and before where the Constitution was written. And never is it ever spelled defense with an S in any of them. It's always spelled with a C. Okay, that's kind of besides the point right now, but I just wanted to point that out again. Okay, so the ship of Theseus. We have the Articles of Confederation, which acknowledged that the states are free, sovereign, and independent. And then we have a constitution. So let's look at here the Articles of Confederation. In the first article, it says, the style of this confederacy shall be capital T, the United States of America. That means this is the original. It's not undone. And in the Constitution, they acknowledge that the Constitution is the second, because it says the United States of America. This thought experiment, Ship of Theseus, has been around for a long time. Okay, and many other thought experiments in philosophy have existed for a long time, thousands of years. So this wasn't a new concept to the founders. They understood what the, capital THE, meant, and what the, lowercase the, meant. And the founders didn't sit around and write every detail that they could think of. There's an unwritten portion to things, unwritten laws. There's foundations of laws that are followed when they write these documents. Okay. Now, in the Articles of Confederation, in the second article, each state, these are the independent states that created the United States. And the United States then created lowercase t, United States of America. Okay. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. That's because they're independent states. And every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States and Congress assembled. Okay, so the Articles of Confederation were never repealed and they were never replaced. It is the original. Without the original, you cannot have the copy. Without the original Ship of Theseus having its planks replaced, there could never have been made a copy Ship of Theseus. Okay? So the second ship exists because the first ship exists. And it's the same with these documents. The second one, which is the Confederation, exists because the Articles of Confederation exist. So the states joined this union, this Article of Confederation, this confederation, which means firm league of friendship. Okay, a confederation can be for bad things and it can be for good things. Outlaws can confederate themselves to do bank robberies and train robberies and that kind of thing. To conspire to do bad things. They can also do good things, which is to acknowledge that the states are free, sovereign, and independent. And these states created the United States. Okay? Now, when it created the United States, it made it its agency to do certain things, and those certain and specific and well-written things, limited and defined, are in this document, the Constitution. And these are the only things that it can do. And this document, the Constitution of the United States, created lowercase the second states, the second set of states, the dependent states. So why do we have two sets of states? Because you have one state, the free, sovereign, and independent states, the independent states that created the firm league of friendship, this Constitution. Well, both. And then when they created the Constitution allowed for the creation of dependent states. The dependent states are dependent on the Confederation, the free states, the sovereign states. The sovereign states allowed for the creation of the seat of government, okay, and it allowed it to places purchase places. And the sovereign states allowed the seat of government to exercise exclusive legislation over itself, the sea, and the places it purchased. And it purchased places for defense with the sea. In accordance with the law of nations, which is acknowledged here in the Constitution. And Thomas Jefferson was well aware of the law of nations, and so were the other founders. The law of nation mentions forts, and it uses defense with the sea. And it was written by Vatels, who was a French person. Now, furthermore, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Now we want to look at Article 4, Section 3, creation of new states. So people say, well, you can't have a state within a state, therefore the Constitution cannot be states within states. The Constitution cannot create states within states because it says you can't have states inside states. That's not what it says. The Confederation allowed the Constitution to create states inside the states. This is the first set of dependent states that was allowed by the Constitution. They acknowledged, you're going to create states inside our states, but what about inside those states? You can't telescope. You can't create states and states and states and states. It's the one state. The one state inside the Constitution are for the posts and the buildings on the posts for defense purposes. New states may be admitted, okay, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state. So the sovereign state had to give up jurisdiction over those areas. Now, the sovereign state can't go and erect another state inside the federal areas. And the federal government can't erect another jurisdiction inside its own federal areas. That's what this is saying. Because it cannot be that the Constitution can't be a state inside of a state, because it already told you in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, that it was going to do exactly that. It was going to erect forts inside the states. Now, a state is not just an area of land with a government. A state is abstract. A state can be an abstract. A state can be many different things. So these states are part of the Union. The Union is an agency of the Confederation. The Union has to abide by its own Constitution, and it can only carry out the things in the Constitution on the federal lands. It wasn't ever supposed to come off the federal lands. That was Lincoln. And for a time before Lincoln even, because the corporations and businessmen had been wanting to overtake the government for some time. And they were finally able to do that with Lincoln. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in, where nobody really understands the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation and how they work together. Now here, this is the Office of the Law Revision Council. It's a government website. It says uscode.house.gov. And you can go here, and it talks about the organic laws, the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, Ordinance 1787, Constitution. So these are like built on each other. The Constitution is not the law of the sovereign lands. It's the law of the dependent states. And the dependent states are the lands of the federal government. Okay, so the Confederation is the capital T Ship of Theseus, or the United States of America. That's the Confederation. It acknowledges the states. When it says states, it means the independent states are free, sovereign, and independent, and are and shall remain that way. The Constitution creates dependent states out of the federal lands, which are purchased by the federal government. Those are the dependent states. And that is the second set of states, the lowercase t United States of America. And these are acknowledged in those founding documents. Okay, so that's and again, the Articles of Confederation, and the fact that they are still good. It's a still good document. And the Confederation also allows for secession because the states are free, sovereign, and independent. They are and shall remain that way. But if they can get you to believe that you're not free, sovereign, and independent, then they can get you to believe that you can't secede from the Union. So the businessmen were able to put Lincoln in office, get him elected, and Lincoln then did a whole bunch of bad things. And you can read, there's books out there. There's the ones I like are by a guy named Thomas Di Lorenzo. His last one is The Problem with Lincoln. And he goes into a whole lot of really major issues with Lincoln. For example, his monument have the symbol of a fascie. Like a fascie is a twining or a bundling, something to hold a bunch of things together. And he says in this book that fascie comes from the word fascism. And those are all over his monument. I've never been to his monument. I can't say myself that I've seen it. But he says that there's these fasces all over. And that's to bundle it and to bring it together, to consolidate power, basically. And so what Lincoln did was he elected his own officers to the military. And originally, the states were supposed to elect their officers. So because Lincoln appointed his officers to the military and made them head of commanding the military, the militia and the military, he was able to easily overtake the states because he brought these really bad people in under him, put uniforms on them, gave them some power, commissioned them as officers, and all this is done outside the Constitution. So it's illegal. It was illegal. It was illegal from the beginning. And he sent them out to basically just wreak havoc among the states, North and South. And he goes into detail on some of the quotes, some quotes that people use. They take small portions of Lincoln's quotes and they make it sound like Lincoln was a good guy doing good things. But when you take the entire sentence or the couple sentences of his quote, you see that he wasn't saying what people thinks he said. But you can't talk bad about Lincoln because he's been sanctified by certain people. But what he did was he took these commanders that he commissioned himself outside of the Constitution and sent them out into the land and basically burned the South. He burned their houses. He raped their women. He killed the husbands and the brothers and the uncles. And if the woman didn't like it, then she was to be treated as a prostitute. He blew up their chimneys. He even killed their crops, burned their crops, killed their cattle, and even the family dog. And Di Lorenzo says he doesn't even know why they wanted to kill the family dog. I suppose it was because a dog could be food. And he didn't want them in the South. He wanted them out of the South. He wanted them to have no reason to stay. And once they were out of the South, he basically had land that he could sell to the business owners to build the railroads. Because as you probably know, or if you don't, Lincoln got his start um, with being a lawyer for the railroads. I think it was the Union Pacific, but don't quote me on that. He also had land that he owned somewhere, I think in Ohio or Pennsylvania, that he wanted to sell to the railroads for a very high price to create some sort of Union Station or something. And that's here in the book also. I've read that also somewhere else. He also let the military take over the railroads that did exist so that they could be used, the railroads could be used after the military took it over to ship products around the country. And they could ship them really cheap. And the person who had the shipping company at the time, the big shipping company, shipping products around, was Rockefeller. So during the Civil War, these businessmen made a ton of money, just like they do now. And they were able to then build their empires, which have basically taken over the government. So what you have is now sort of a split. You have the constitutional government and you have the unconstitutional government. And the unconstitutional government requires your consent, requires you to either, it requires you to contract with them by either express or implied consent. Express consent means you signed a paper, and that's their forms. These forms are non-federalist. They do not comply with the ideas of federalism. That means they're a contract for their social system. Their implied contract is like, for example, the use of money, because there's two types of contracts, express or implied. Implied is when you say, if you deliver this to me, if you deliver me a carton of oranges, I'll give you $20. We don't have anything in writing, but I bring you a carton of oranges, you owe me $20. And that will stand up in court. That's an implied contract. So when you use the dollar, the fiat currency, you're supporting the social system outside the Constitution by an implied contract. You're using it, so you're agreeing to something. An express contract then are the forms for them to confiscate your money out of your check. Because if you go back here, you see that the people who are actually supposed to pay taxes on their income are, when it says the states, it's talking about the dependent states. So the federal people on the federal lands, those are the ones in the dependent state. They are supposed to pay an income tax. Okay, because they have a benefit because they're living and working on federal lands. Title 26 that they use against the rest of us has never been passed into positive law, meaning it's has no positive law citation, and it's not a law because it's a contract outside the Constitution. It requires your consent. It requires you to use one of the federal forms. If the federal forms are used for federal persons, then it's constitutional. If the federal forms are used for non-federal persons, it's a contract. It's part of the social system. It's outside the Constitution, and they cannot use their constitutional offices for unconstitutional purposes, because that is using their office for some sort of private profit or gain, and that's what they're doing. Okay, so I give you a whole bunch of information, and I told you what's the true, where your true freedom is. It's right here in the Articles of Confederation, because this is the original, the capital T, United States of America, the Articles of Confederation, which is a style of confederacy which acknowledges that all states are free, sovereign, and independent. And the lowercase t, the United States of America, which created dependent states under the control and jurisdiction of the federal government by the Constitution, which they agree to follow. They have an oath to it. Okay? So Lincoln changed all that, and he brought everyone in under the Constitution, and then started telling lies that the Confederation was replaced, repealed, da 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 da. They've taken over the lands. They've plundered our natural resources. They've plundered us through our labor and taxing our labor. And now they want to tax it more and more. And now they got gas prices up to almost $3 a gallon where I am. They want to tax your mileage for roads that they don't actually have authority to regulate. They only have the authority to regulate themselves on the highways. Now it says on highways that it's a positive law. It has an asterisk right here, which means they're claiming that it's a positive law. But if you look in there, there's no positive law citation. So it's actually not a positive law. Positive law means it's according to the dictates of the Constitution, and they have a right to command. They only have a right to command the people on the dependent states. That's in the Constitution. Okay, so I've said enough for now. Go ahead and look at this. Look up the Ship of Theseus. Do some research on your own. Do some reading. The Problem with Lincoln by Thomas J. DiLorenzo tells a really good story. It's a really good read. I enjoyed reading the book. I think you'll enjoy it too. Maybe you can get the audiobook. I think there is an audiobook. You'll have to check. And think about what I've told you, and think about the consequences. Think about the meaning of everything. Think about how the federal government doesn't actually have control over your life. Not really. That you are free, sovereign, and independent. You have the right to make the choices that you want to make. And you have a right to have your state secede from the Union. Okay, so that is our Confederate right, our right to our life, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness, and the right to our freedom and sovereignty and independence. Okay, so if you have any questions, post them in the comments section, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.